this video, we're going to be factoring the trinomials completely when our a value is not equal to 1. So that means that our leading coefficient is not the number 1, it's these other numbers. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at letter A together, and it's 2c squared minus 14c minus 36. So the first thing we want to check to see is if there's a greatest common factor that all three terms have in common that we can remove. And we see that they're all even numbers, which tells us that we can take out the number 2. So we're going to go ahead and take out the number 2. Let me just use a different color really quick. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take out the number 2. So we're going to pull the number 2 out, and that's going to leave us with a c squared minus 7c minus 18. Now, what we're looking to factor is just this inside piece right here, this c squared minus 7c minus 18. So we're looking for two numbers that will multiply to negative 18, but add to a negative 7. In this case, we might try and use 9 and 2. So we'll go ahead and we're going to bring our 2 down from right here, and then we're going to set up our two sets of factors. We're using the letter C, and we're using a 9 and a 2. And we can see from right here that our symbols are supposed to be different, and this tells us that our bigger number is supposed to be the negative. So we're going to make this a negative 9 and a positive 2, and we're going to check by putting a negative there and a positive here, and say, okay, what is negative 9 plus a positive 2? And we get that it's a negative 7, just like what we wanted. So that tells us that we have now gotten our factors. Now it's important to make sure that you bring the number that you took out down, because if you don't bring that down and you leave it off, then you haven't shown the full factor. Because what we should be able to do is we should be able to FOIL this and then take that and multiply it by the 2, and it should give us our original problem of 2c squared minus 14c minus 36. So it's really important to make sure that you bring down those things that you factor out in the beginning for your final answer. Let's go ahead and let's try letter B together. So here we're going to look and see if there's something that all three terms have in common that we can pull out. And it doesn't look like it because this middle value is an odd, so we can't take out a 2, and they don't have any other numbers or variables in common. So in this case, we're going to do something I like to call the disco square, because it's kind of fun and colorful. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a box that has 4 windows in it, or 4 other little boxes. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the first thing in our equation and we're going to put it in the first box. And we're going to take the last thing and put it in the last box. So we're going to have a 6k squared there, and then our 4. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that 6k squared and we're going to multiply it by the 4. And that's going to give us 24k squared. Okay, so we took our first thing and we took our last thing, and it gave us this 24k squared piece. And we want to know what two numbers will multiply to make 24k, or excuse me, k squared. Now to get the k squared, you have k times k. So we're just going to go ahead and in these two leftover boxes, that's where we're going to put the k times k that's going to give us the k squared we need. But now we need to know what are two numbers that will multiply to 24 but will add to a negative 11. So we might try numbers like 3 and 8, or 6 and 4. And let's try one of those and let's see if those work before we keep listing more numbers. Let's see here. So we might, this looks promising, our 3 and our 8. And we know that by looking here, we're going to have the same symbols. And that our larger number is going to be the negative. So if we check that out, we'd have a negative there and a positive there. So if we took 3 and added it to a negative 8, that would give us a negative 5. Or rather, I guess we kind of looked at that a little bit funny, didn't we? Because their symbols are supposed to be the same. which means that we're not necessarily saying that the bigger number is going to be negative, but we're saying that our symbol is going to be negative, meaning that both of these would be our negatives. There we go. So we have negative 3 plus negative 8, and that gives us our negative 11. So we'll use the negative 3 and negative 8, and it doesn't matter where we put those. So I'm just going to put the 3 here and the negative 8 there. And now we want to know, what exactly do both of those numbers have in common? So what does a 6k squared and a negative 3k have in common? Well, they both have a 3 in common, so we can take out a 3, and they both have a k. Now we want to know, what do those numbers have in common? And they both have a 4 in common. Now because our leading number here is negative, we're actually going to get to pull out a negative as well. So now we want to know, what do those numbers have in common? And they're both even and have a k, so we can take out a 2k. And last, we want to know, what do those numbers have in common? And they don't really have anything in common, so we can only pull out a 1. But again, because our top number was a negative, we can pull out a negative 1. And now we just want to check to make sure that this makes sense. If I take 3k and multiply it by 2k, do I get 6k squared, which is this piece right here? And the answer is yes, I do. Well, what happens if I take 3k and multiply it with negative 1? Do I get the negative 3k here that I'm supposed to have? And I do. And then we're going to check going this other direction, and we see that 2k times negative 4 is in fact the negative 8k. And if I take the negative 4 and multiply it with negative 1, we get a positive 4 like we need to. So we know we have all of the right numbers. So how do I know what the factors are? This group of numbers is going to be a factor, and this group of numbers are going to be factors. So I'll get to write 3k minus 4 and 2k minus 1. And those are my factors. And we're finished. So we're going to do letter C again together. Here we have a 12a squared plus 5a minus 2. They don't have anything in common, so we're going to use our disco box again. So we're going to set it up. And we're going to take the first thing and put it in the first box, and take the last thing and put it in the last box. So we have 12a squared and negative 2. And then we're going to multiply those. And that's going to give us a negative 24a squared. And the numbers that make that, but add to 5, will go in our green boxes. So I'm going to take our a's and put them there. Remember, the a's come from right there. And now we're looking for two numbers that will multiply to negative 24 but add to 5. So I'm going to go ahead and use 8 and 3. And because here I have a minus sign, that tells me that these are going to be different symbols, and that my larger number is going to be the plus sign. So if I use this as my plus and this is my minus, and say 8 plus a negative 3, I'm going to get a 5, which is exactly what we need. So I'm going to use a positive 8 and the negative 3, and look for the numbers that they have in common. So I'm going to start here and see that those actually have a 4 in common and the a. These numbers, they only have a negative 1 in common. When I look at these numbers, I see that they both have a 3 and an a. And when I look at these numbers, I see that they each have a 2 in common. And now I'm ready to write down my factors. So one of my factors is going to be 4a minus 1, and one of my factors is going to be 3a plus 2. And it doesn't matter the order that I write those in. I could have even put the pink one first, the 3a plus 2 first, and the 4a minus 1 second, and still gotten the same answer. It still would be the same. And so these are my factors of 12a squared plus 5a minus 2. And so that is how you can factor trinomials when the leading coefficient isn't a 1.